Hey coding crew, medical coding content is starting to flourish, and here are some podcasts for medical coding that you are definitely going to want to check out. Let's take a look. Hey everyone, I'm Victoria, and if you're new to my channel, I am here every week providing tips, tricks, and tutorials to help you succeed in a medical coding career. For a while, I was getting requests to start a podcast, and it's a lot of work to start a podcast, and I didn't want to do it while I was still trying to figure out YouTube. You know, it's important that when you're learning these platforms, you don't try to do everything at once, that you try not to do Instagram and YouTube and podcasts and webinars and courses. So I try to keep everything like once I've mastered one thing, I can move on to the next. And I really hadn't intended to start a podcast, but I had gotten a boom arm and a microphone because of my doing virtual meetings for the AAPC and webinars and all kinds of courses and stuff, and I wanted better audio. And as I was going through and editing the audio, I'm like, wow, this is a lot easier than editing video. And I just kept hearing more and more, you got to start a podcast, you got to start a podcast, you got to start a podcast. And it's funny because I had a friend that had a podcast, oh my God, it was like 15, 20 years ago. And I'm kind of like, nah, they're going away. Podcasts, those are old school news stuff. But apparently they're not going away. The industry is pretty booming. So I decided to start a podcast. And what I really looked at was my analytics. When I look at my analytics, most of my audience is women in their 20s and 30s. And based on a lot of the comments I'm getting, it's also people that are working from home or looking into getting into medical coding with the goal of working from home because they just had a baby and they want to start a career, or their kids are getting grown and now they want to start a career, or they just want more time with their family, which is totally understandable, and I get it. So my podcast is going to go a little bit more behind the scenes and not just talk about medical coding, but what it's like to work from home as a medical coder, and just some of the stories of like successes and failures that I personally have had. I'm not sure yet if I'm going to do guests, so I guess that'll be left to be seen. I do want to do eventually, so I think some guests on my YouTube channel. I'd love to bring in my plastic surgeon. He's hilarious. He's a big old Philadelphia boy. Check him out on Instagram at Dr. Subio. Too funny. So the YouTube channel is really going to stay to its core of tips, tricks, and tutorials. And then the podcast is going to go a little bit more behind the scenes, talking about me, talking about what it's like to work from home, tips for working from home, you know, struggles of working from home, what it's like having to deal with kids during this pandemic and pets during this pandemic and partners during this pandemic. And how I am certainly not, at the top of the pillar succeeding at all of that, but really no one is right now, and that's okay. So because of doing the podcast, I really want to do my podcast as like a let's end the week strong on a Friday, so that you can kind of go, okay, here's something a little bit more light and refreshing to end the week. And because of that, I'm going to switch my schedule for my YouTube videos. I used to post on Wednesday, Friday, so now it's going to be YouTube videos Tuesday, Thursday, and then podcast on Friday. Now, this isn't a new concept. Medical coding podcasting has been around for a few years. So here's some other podcasts that you're definitely going to want to check out. First is Tony Elholm's Alpha Coding Podcast. So this is going to be a great partnership because what's going to happen now is Tony's theme of her podcast is Start the Week Off Smarter. And the theme of my podcast is going to be Let's End the Week Strong. So you're going to have a great week because you're going to start it off smart and end it real strong, and just with something a little bit kind of light to get you into that mood for the weekend. Tony does some really great crucial information. She is a mega mind when it comes to telehealth. So she is amazing in that realm. And her entrepreneurship, her motivation is just so wonderful. And some of the interviews that she's had, I've been on the podcast a couple times, so definitely check those episodes out. And a lot of other really cool people in the medical coding realm, people that I have now developed like these wonderful little internet relationships with, like Sonal Patel, who is a genius. And just like my channel, Tony is giving you a free resource on how to be successful as a medical coder. So take advantage of that. Another podcast you're going to want to check out is the Not Elsewhere Classified podcast, which is part of Medical Coding Geek by Brian Quee, who has built a fantastic community. He is very into the community and showing off all the cool stuff that goes on in the medical coding, HIM, clinical documentation improvement community. And he's built some great communities on Facebook. You can check those out too. And actually, I was on the podcast just last week. We had such a great time. It had to get split into 2 episodes. But here's some highlights, so let's take a look.
Welcome everybody to the Not Also Classified podcast. Today on the podcast, I have on a special guest. Everybody's special, of course, but this one's definitely special because I have a lot of questions to ask her today. It seems more selfish on my part, but I think everybody can most definitely benefit from what she has to share with her career in medical coding and also her evolving YouTube channel that has been standing out. So today on the podcast, I have Victoria Mole. What they need to understand is that, like you have a very creative mind. I have more of an analytical / creative mind, trying to figure out things that is not the norm of coding. And when you think of coding, again, I always think of the book hugging, right? Of the book hugging, right. All of this stuff and into the book, and that's it. Yes, that is it, but again, like there has to be more to it. And if you're in that role of coding this, coding that, next chart, coding this, code that, next chart, you're going to be bored. Right. So I think for us and everybody that's doing even podcasts and YouTube videos nowadays, we're trying to advance the profession.
Brian's been great with bringing in members from the community to talk about things like how they've managed when they fail their exam and what has made them successful as a coder. So if you're interested in stories of other coders and other people in the healthcare profession, that's a podcast you're going to want to look at. And then there is the Codecast podcast by Terry Fletcher, who is a very well-known, very long-standing consultant in the medical coding field, and she does a lot of really interesting stuff, like talks about designs that she's done for medical offices and how they're supposed to flow appropriately to make sure that patients are going through efficiently and that it's appropriate for like disabled patients. So just really interesting tidbits like that, in addition to providing you for free some amazing knowledge, things that are definitely going to make you a more well-rounded medical professional. And Terry's podcast is a solo podcast, so she does a lot of things like code updates, Q&As, just talking about hot topics that are going on. So it's a really pertinent, relevant thing that you're going to want to keep up on. And Terry is oftentimes on the Talk 10 podcast, which is about ICD-10. The Talk 10 Tuesdays is done by ICD-10 Monitor, and it's a lot of updates about coding on ICD-10 codes and topics. So that's another tool that you're going to want to put in your tool belt so that you make sure that you are up to date on some of those changes and guidelines. Being a medical coder is a lifelong learning process. It is a lifetime commitment to learning. Things are constantly changing in this field. You know how they have those little like news tickers at the bottom of the news sometimes? I swear there could be one with just like insurance updates and medical code changes, just like daily, just streaming at the bottom of your screen. If you've ever felt like there's just poor communication and you don't know that updates are happening, just understand that there are so many updates happening that literally it would have to be like a little ticker going across your screen all of the time to give you updates of every insurance policy and, regulation that is constantly changing. So, give yourself a little bit of leniency because it's a tough industry, guys. It is. There's a lot of updates just constantly going on. So you really have to commit to being a lifelong learner and also knowing how to narrow down the things that are really important and how to start divvying out like, I'll file this away and pull it out when I need it, but right now I can't commit to storing this anywhere because I've got too much going on. So that's it. Those are my top medical coding podcasts that you're going to want to check out, and make sure you definitely check out my podcast. It is on my website, contempocoding.com, and there's a button at the top that says podcasts, or you can just check out the link below to check out my podcast that's going to come out every Friday. Do you have a favorite medical coding podcast? If so, drop it in the comments below. And as always, if you like this, you want to see more content, make sure you're supporting my channel by subscribing and hitting that notification bell so that you never miss another episode. I will see you in the next episode, and you'll hear me on Fridays on my podcast. But until then, just keep on coding on.